Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of our scale modeling channel. Today we're doing a detailed tape-up review of the brand new Hobby Boss 1/48 scale B-24J. This kit right here. It just came in about 2 weeks ago and I've been working on it diligently, and I've broken it into two parts. Part 1 is going to cover a lot of the small meticulous part assemblies, and then Part 2 will focus on the wings, the fuselage, and the tail. And along the way, I'm going to give you a lot of really good tips on how to assemble this model. It's got a really high parts count. And I'm also going to put some links at the bottom of the description, because about 1.5 years ago, I posted a video on a B-24J that's out in Tucson, Arizona, and I did a lot of really close-up detail shots that are going to help you build this kit. And if you go to my website, and there's a link to that too, you can download that, all the pictures, as a PDF. So, with all of that said, let's get started with Part 1. The vast majority of the parts in this kit have tree attachment points that come in and then they attach to the gluing surface. And so traditionally, trees that attach to parts are set up like this. But a lot of these newer kits, you've got the tree attachment points right on the gluing surface. So what I do is I'll rough cut out a part, and then I'll go ahead and remove most of the tree attachment where they're attached to the gluing surfaces, and then you take a pair of snippers like this and you can snip them right off. And most times you just hit them with a little bit of sandpaper from a sanding stick like this, and that takes care of the problem. So you have to get rid of this larger piece first. And if you do that, these attachments on the gluing surfaces come right off. Oh, that one didn't. There we go. That's how you do it. And then these larger ones pretty much do the same thing. Well, we'll get it from this angle here. Nope, didn't work. So we're gonna have to do that. And that worked. You got to be careful here. You don't want to snip off these parts just where the trees are. And you just sand it smooth. So that's how I do it, and it works very, very well. Get a little bit more off of here. And now you just sand it smooth. So what you don't want to do is gouge into the upper surfaces of these parts. So this kit, you've got a lot of cleanup work to do and a ton of tree attachment points to cut off. So my recommendation is to go slow. Do a section at a time, work on a wing with all of its parts, work on the next wing, work on the tail. The fuselage is the same thing. All of the tree attachment points on the fuselage are along the gluing surfaces. So if you do it the way I do it, you won't have any damage to the gluing surfaces or gouges on the upper side that you'll have to fill. The landing gear bays consist of 13 parts, and what I suggest you do, I followed the sequence in the instructions and it worked really, really well. The only thing I didn't glue into place is this piece right here. This is a hydraulic mechanism for the lower part of the landing gear, and I'm not sure if it sits on top of this piece here or on the bottom. So I'm going to hold off gluing this in place until I get that figured out. But what I did was, there's keys, open keys on the underside, and I use Tester's glue wherever possible to set things in place, and that gave me some working time. So it's this piece, and this piece first, and you can hit those with some Tester's glue on the underside, and then this piece gets attached to this one and this one. So I glued this piece here to this side, set these in place, and then put the front and back on to position everything up correctly. And then I hit a little bit of super glue on the inside areas here, and that held everything in place until I glued the front, the back, the left, and the right side in place. And when you glue the front and back on, this piece, you can push up a little bit here and make it nice and tight. And the same thing here, and then these two pieces pop right into place. So surprisingly, as complicated as this is with 13 parts, everything fit together really, really well. Now, when I did the landing gear, I glued this part in place, but this part here, when you set it in place, and make sure that you put it on the lower area, on this lower pin opening. The upper pin opening is for the scissors for the oleo. So when you put it in the lower opening, let's see if I can get it in there. There we go. And what it does, when you put it all in place, what it does is it pushes the landing gear that way a little bit, which is kind of odd because it results in the landing gear kind of cocked back a little bit, I think. But I won't know for sure until I get everything taped up and the wings taped up to the fuselage, and then we'll take a look at it again. So I'm not going to glue this part in place just yet. Now, this part fits inside. There's an opening right here, and this part fits in here like a glove, and the wing closes up right over it. See if I can get this closed up here, closed up without any interference at all. It's nice and tight, and on both sides, nice and tight. So, and it's pretty detailed. So everything fits together. So far, so good. And once I get the wings taped up, I'll check the ailerons on the flaps and the rest of the engine nacelles and the covers and the engines. But so far, so good. I've got both landing gear bays completely assembled, and they came out pretty good. So the other thing is, I had mentioned earlier that the main landing gears wiggle a little bit inside these pin locations. And so what I did was I laminated 0.010 by 0.040 in strips on just one side, and then carefully scraped and sanded it and form fitted it into place so that now it's a nice tight fit. I did it on both of them. Here's the other one. So that fixed that problem. Now, the landing gear tires, I had to drill out this hole, both the holes on the main landing gear tires a tiny, tiny bit to a 0.094, and I got a really tight fit here. So if you don't do that, they're not going to go in. It's just a little bit off. The other thing is that these hubs pop in and out because these tires are hollow, and because of the weight that you're going to have to put on this model, to get it to sit correctly on its tricycle landing gear, the tires are going to go a little bit like that. So you may want to consider getting a set of resin ones so that you don't have to worry about this. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I suspect it's going to, because it's going to take a lot of weight to get it balanced correctly. The forward landing gear, I didn't have to do anything here. It slips nicely into place, and it does not have this problem because it's really small. It's very sturdy, and the pin fits well inside its location in the forward part of the fuselage, nice and tight. So I think that kind of concludes my comments on the landing gear assemblies and the bays. So we're good to go, at least on these parts. The engine nacelles are in two parts, upper and lower. And in addition to these large separate parts, this piece right here is a separate piece on both sides of the engine nacelles and on both parts. And the fit is nice and tight on these. So you just have to be careful gluing them into place. And when I get these glued in, I'll show you how I do it. What I wanted to show you here is that the instructions call for you to assemble this, install it in here, and then glue this part on. And you don't have to do that. You can hold off, paint these, get everything painted up, and then install these separately, and they slide right into place, and they pop onto the underside just like that. So, and the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that the fit of these are extremely tight, very well engineered. And the only place you got to worry about the seam work is along here, the top, and on this side. The rest of this, you're not going to see these seams, so I wouldn't mess with them other than to make sure it's secured together with some glue. So, this engineering that they did for this is pretty impressive. And I checked the fit on the underside of the wing, and they're nice and tight. Once I get the wing taped up and everything taped on, I'll show you. But pretty impressive. The forward part of the engine nacelles are a two-piece affair, and it's kind of a nice touch. You get the air intake opening here. Now, on these parts go in on the back side, and it's a one piece, and there's a ring here and here. The problem is that these rings will not fit in their respective locations. They make these parts stand up. So what you're going to have to do is cut the rings off, and then these parts will pretty much fit right into place. And what I did was I touched a little bit, a tiny bit of super glue here and here, and then once it was dried, ran a bead across here. But it's definitely an improvement over the old monogram front engine nacelle. Nice touch. Now, there's a little bit of a seam here, kind of like a tiny void. And when I build this kit, what I'm going to do is I'll just hit this with some flat primer and then fill this area with some white glue and contour it with a damp Q-tip. I'll probably have to do it 2 or 3 times to get it all filled. But that would solve the problem. If you try to use super glue, what's going to happen is you're going to mar this surface here. Some of the glue is going to drip back here, and if you try to scrape it off, this backside part is so thin you just puncture it. So it's best to use some white glue here to fill this. If you may decide not to do it and you're really not going to notice it. So that's a nice touch. The engines, I don't know what it is about Hobby Boss and engines, but They just can't get it right. These are a pretty poor rendition. It's just a really poor representation of an 1830, Pratt & Whitney R1830. So this is the monogram one, and of course it's much better. And the monogram one is slightly larger, and their engine nacelles are slightly larger. You can use these. You'll have to sand down this backing till it gets paper thin, and then it'll just pop off. You just run it across a stationary piece of sandpaper like this, and it won't take but 5 minutes to get rid of this backing. And then you can put a smaller backing on it with some white plastic, evergreen white plastic, and then you may have to sand down these tops a little bit to get it to fit. But once it's in place, you're only going to see that much of it. You're not going to see the engine tops, just like that. So yes, the monogram ones would definitely be better. And another option here is to get a Resin 2 Details 3D printed 1830s. This is an early version of an 1830, and this is what it looks like painted. I'm using these on my monogram C47 Skytrain, which uses the same engine as the B-24 Liberator. So, and again, these are slightly larger than these engines, and so what you're going to have to do is sand down the tops a little bit, but again, once it's in place, that's all you're going to see. So, yeah, you can make this work. Now, with these, if you decide to use these, what you're going to have to do is cut this out so that you can build up the backing to get the engine to sit correctly with the front protruding out for the prop. So if you decide to just use the kit supplied engines, everything fits together really, really nice and tight. You don't need to do any filling or sanding here at all. It's a really nice tight fit. So, considering the level of detail of this kit, you're going to want to use either the monogram engines or one of these 3D printed 1830s. So I strongly recommend that you either do one of those two options, and they're really not very hard to paint, the 3D print engines. And when I publish my multi-part series on the C47 Skytrain, I'm going to show you how to paint this. It came out pretty good. So those are my thoughts on these engine parts and the front of the engine nacelles, and that kind of completes everything associated with the wing assemblies. So now it's time to start working on the bulkheads and the decking on the inside of the fuselage. The engine cowlings have these small pieces and indentations both on the bottom and on the top. So I'm going to show you how to do the bottom first. And again, the instructions say to attach this piece first and then this piece, but you don't need to do that. It'll slip right in place underneath here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of Testor's red tube glue and a line along here, and use this stiff wire applicator, 0.018 inches in diameter, and just put a little bit of glue right along this ridge here. And then I'm just going to slide this in place and hold it with pieces of tape like I did with this one. And then once this is dry, what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of super glue on this side and on this side, and that'll keep it strong enough that and this looks, the fit is really tight. It's really good. So let's go ahead and squeeze a little bit of Testor's red tube glue onto this piece of paper, and then we're going to put just tiny dabs
right along here. And just enough to glue it. Yeah, my hands are shaking this morning. I got too much coffee again. And if you just put a little bit, it won't squeeze out on you and get on the surface. Hey, perfect. And we'll just put a little bit of tape on here, help hold it until it dries. And again, I'll do the same thing. I'll just put tiny drops of fresh medium set super glue along that ridge and that ridge, and that'll hold it. That's how you do it. And once I get the bottom done, I'll show you how I do the top. We'll go ahead and clean this tip, and for each one of these parts you want a fresh line of the tester's red tube glue, otherwise it gets stringy. In about 15 seconds it'll start to get stringy anyway, so that's why you got to replace them frequently. So that's how I do it. So next we'll do the top side, which is part of the wing. I super glued the engine nacelles to the lower wing, and the way I did it was I outlined them with a Sharpie so that when I set these parts down, I got real close in the positioning so I wouldn't smear glue on the wings. They have each one of these has two positioning pins, one here and one here. So I put some slow set super glue on the lips, just a tiny bead, and then just pressed it down. That's all you had to do. They're a real nice fit on the wings. And here's the other one. This the reason why I did this inking pen here is it gives you a visual so that you don't push down and realize you're in the wrong location and then smear the wing with super glue. So there you have it. That's how you do it. I've got the initial gluing done on the elevators and rudders, and how I did it was I used the slow set super glue, put a puddle on a piece of paper, and then kind of went along and just touched it around the edges, not all the way. I didn't do the entire perimeter, just certain areas, and then put it together, taped it up, and looks pretty good. You still, the seams on all of these parts are really tight, but you're going to need to put a bead of medium set in order to super glue in order to seal these seams here. I don't think you need to do it back here because the elevators are going to cover that, but I'll check that in a few minutes. The other thing is you really need to put some super glue along these, along the hinge lines here. Otherwise, they'll break on you because they're pretty thin. So that's how I did it on all of these parts. Again, just a bead of super glue intermittently around the edge, just a little amount, and spread it out so that when you put it together it doesn't squeeze out on you. And then strips of tape to tightly hold everything in place until it dries. And here again, it's really tight on both of these parts, and it looks pretty good. So got to put a bead around the outside here and on the inside in order to fix it. Get rid of those seams because you get a little bit here and here, and on this one same thing. So medium set super glue with the bead line will fix that. So it's not going to take much. And then on the rudders, these are really tight. So I think you just a tiny, tiny bead here. You don't want to use too much because you don't want it to bleed out onto the sides. But the fit is just exceptional on all the parts I've checked so far. So it's looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and take the tape off, and we'll check the fit, and I'll show you how that looks, and then we're ready to move on to some other stuff. I've got all the tape removed, and the elevators fit quite nicely in the openings and the horizontal stabilizer. And you can actually put them in place without the tape, but I put the tape on there so they won't pop off. So just remember, the trim tab controls are on the underside, just like the instructions say. Now, on the rudders, same thing, nice and tight, both of them. And here again, they kind of pop on and stay on, but I put a little bit of tape on here to hold them. Now, on this side, you get a fairly tight fit on this side. On this side, it was loose. So what I did was I glued 0.01 by 0.06 strip here, and then scraped it down and form fitted this piece into place so that it was a tight fit. Now, the fit is so tight here and here on this side, you don't, if anything, you can just use a little bit of white glue after you've primed it to fill these tiny, tiny seams. But the fit here, again, is exceptional. So, yeah, it's looks pretty good so far. Pretty impressive engineering. Everything fits nice and tight. So we're done with this, and I haven't checked the fit, excuse me, of this part on the fuselage yet because I haven't taped up the fuselage. But I suspect it's going to be nice and tight, and you, again, probably just some white glue on the outside, contoured with a damp Q-tip, and you're done. So I'm pretty impressive so far. I'm impressed so far. So I'll go ahead and pop these off and lay this down. I've got the top turret and the front turret assembled. So let me talk about the front turret first. Of course, the first thing you notice is it's split, just like the monogram kit was. And you would think that with all of this tiny detail that they designed and incorporated into this turret, that they could figure out some way not to do this. Now, when you close this up, it's a tight fit, but there's an interference problem, and it's on these top bars right there. See how they move? That's what you're going to have to either work on or don't worry about it. So I would run bead of super glue here where it's metal, and on this side where it's metal, and you hold it in place real tight when you do that. And while the seam is almost disappears because it's a really, really tight fit, you can still see it. So now they did this same thing on their 1/32 scale kit, where it's split at the top, and it's really noticeable in 1/32 scale. Luckily, there was a company in England that offers you the seamless turret covers, and they're a little bit expensive, and there's a long lead time when you order them, but I've got 2 sets, and they did a really nice job. I just wish someone would do this in clear resin and 1/48 scale. When you assemble these, there's no tray for these guns to elevate and depress at the same angle, so you're going to have to be really, really careful when you glue these in place that they're at the same angle, because if you do that, that's not going to be very accurate, and they didn't operate independently. The other thing is that this tray at the bottom is pretty flimsy and everything attaches to it, so you're going to have to be careful. When I glued the interior area together first, that part right there, the control handles it's a tiny separate part, and there's too many small, tiny parts in this kit. They did the same thing on their 1:350th scale Missouri. They incorporated so many separate, tiny parts that they're hard to manage, they're hard to clean up, and even harder to glue into place because they're so small. So even intermediate modelers are going to have a problem. It's going to be a real challenge putting this together. These outer pieces, I use Tester's glue, and I use Tester's glue to do all the assembly here with tiny drops of it, and then once it was dry, then I hit it with some super glue. But glue these outer pieces in place, and then you can, because this base is kind of flimsy, you can stretch this out a little bit and pop these guns into place, and they have tiny pins on them. So be careful when you cut these parts off that you don't cut those pins. So the other thing is that these shields, they slip onto each barrel. The problem is that the diameter needs to be increased a tiny bit so that the base of the gun sits up against this. Otherwise, it's going to look funny. And you can, on all of these guns, you can replace them. The bases are wide enough that if you're very, very careful and you position your drills at the center, you can replace these with the two-part Masters brass barrels, which are really, really nice. I used them on my B-17 kit, and they came out really, really well. So again, the frustration here is this. So what you need to do again is glue it on the sides and don't glue it on the top, and that's about the best you can do here. Now the top turret, again, a lot of small parts, most of which on the top turret you're not going to see. This one moves on a tray, but there's an interference problem with the tray, so on the left and right side of the tray, go ahead and sand it down just a little bit so it moves more freely. And the tray has got pins on the end that are sandwiched here, and you got to open up the openings for the pins a little bit, and it's still, there's a little bit of a seam here, and I wasn't able to close that up. These two pieces on the bottom, use Tester's glue, one of the tiny drops to put on the top here, and then set it in place, and it gives you a little bit of working time to make sure that it's seated correctly and that it's straight. And the same thing with this one. This one moved on me a little bit, but once this top turret pops down, you're not going to see any of this gorgeous detail that they put on the bottom. And again, there's oxygen bottles and stuff that go on here, and you're just not going to see it. So again, these can be replaced with the two-part Masters, although the barrels aren't too bad, but the two-part Masters brass barrels are much better, and I highly recommend that you consider doing that. So the ball turret, I haven't checked the fit on it. It's got a lot of parts. I suspect you're going to have a challenge with all the tiny parts that are associated with it, and the same thing with the aft turret. Now the aft turret is not split left or front and back. It's split left and right, and you've got the same issues. So that's how I would do it, and that concludes my comments. And there's a little frustration in my voice, and it's because of what they did here. This is a $120 kit, and you would think that they could figure out a way to do this with slide molding.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching part 1 of the tape-up review of the Hobby Boss 148 scale B-24J, and stay tuned for part 2. That'll be coming up in the next 24 hours. With that, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. Give us a thumbs up, and when you get the chance, visit our website at www.mikeashe.com. With that, have a great evening and happy scale modeling.